We're here. We made it. We have a very special guest with us today, this evening, coming to us from the Bay Area, California, Silicon Valley, Kevin Nichols. Kevin, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
We're certainly happy to have you. Let's chop wood. We're now almost 19 months into a pandemic that has changed the landscape in the land. Every industry across the spectrum has been impacted and affected somehow. And we find ourselves at a time where education certainly has been impacted. You have a history of doing many things and guiding many people in the work that you have been exploring for some time. Audience, we're going to be touching on a number of things: science, mathematics, engineering, so forth and so on. So put on your seatbelt. We have a bit of ride ahead of us. With all that said, with so much to explore, my first question, naturally, who's Kevin Nichols?
Well, I have a few taglines that I created for myself that are, I guess, brands that I have. One was the social politician, and that was because I was doing a lot of work with political candidates, helping them build their online presence, as well as doing a lot of fundraising for them. But lately, I've been called the social engineer. And the way that I use the quote is pretty, I think it's interesting because when you say social engineering to people, they mostly think of, hacking, stealing passwords, and doing nefarious stuff online. However, I pulled the quote from a famous lawyer by the name of Charles Hamilton Houston. He said, "A lawyer is either a social engineer or a parasite on society." So although technically I'm not a lawyer or an engineer in background and education, the way that I use the quote is you're either part of the problem or part of the solution. So that's, in a nutshell, who I am and what I do.
Let's explore that for a moment, the social engineer. For us that may not be privy to understanding where that comes from, that experience in your native state, in your earlier years, let's go a little bit further back. When did it begin, this path to becoming the social engineer, and in your first steps of education in formative years, if you will, and growing up, what has helped shape this quest?
Well, ironically, when I tell my story, I teach a class called The Personal Brand Called You. And I actually walk through my audience, show them pictures of me as, about four years old, what I thought of myself at that time, what I wanted to be when I grow up. And I walk them through my career journey. And at the time, it's a funny picture. I'll have to share it with later, but I look like Prince. I've got like a, a fluffy shirt on and a tuxedo, but I was actually a ring bearer in the picture. But at that moment, at that time, I thought I wanted to be the first Black president of the United States. And so looking out, I saw like politics as something that was something extremely like just interesting and intriguing for me for some reason. And so I knew that there was not a pre-president or a junior president job, so I knew that I could be something else and then eventually become president and run for president. So I thought about engineering as a pre-career because I saw there weren't a lot of Black and brown students going into traditional engineering. So I was looking at mechanical engineering specifically. And I noticed that there weren't a lot of Black kids going into mechanical engineering particularly. So that was one motivator for me. But in looking at all that, the ironic part about it was that I knew that there was a way that I'd have to live my life in order to become president. Because I grew up during a time where there were not the Kevin Hart, but the Gary Hart situation, him going through some scandals, and then other political candidates that had scandals in their lives growing up. And I realized that for me, I wanted to live my life on the straight path to avoid getting caught up in these kinds of scandals. And so I live my life, or I try to live my life, as a squeaky clean way, and also in a very public way, because I realized that whatever I did publicly would be scrutinized. And so I would always try to live my life through that lens. And we can get more about how that changed in my career, in my life, but that's how I was thinking as a young person and in middle school with engineering.
You work with youth. The social engineer has now developed, which I've personally seen of its success and its growth, has now developed into the social engineering project. What is this?
It is a Oakland-based social impact venture with Stanford University, designed to address the lack of diversity in the tech industry by creating culturally relevant STEM pipeline programs for young people to get interested in math, science, chemistry, physics, and engineering. And it was started through a relationship with a buddy of mine from high school, Dr. Brian Brown. And it originally came from his brainchild, his vision, by wanting to create a week-long day camp at Stanford for 5th and 6th graders. That's kind of how the whole organization started. And I continued that mission and have added more programs and more scalable things in order to accomplish and achieve what he had set out in the beginning.
Let's go with that to Oakland. What is Oakland to you?
Oakland's where I'm headquartered. Oakland's where I grew up. I grew up in a small town called El Cerrito, which is a suburb of Oakland, about 15 minutes away. But most of my socializing and activity growing up as a junior high, high school student, and college student took place in Oakland. So I'm not, Oakland people, Oakland natives get very territorial about, whether or not you went through school there, et cetera. I went to a small high school in Berkeley called St. Mary's High School. And we had a lot of students from Oakland there as well. So I kind of grew up in Oakland, but I'm not an Oakland native. But for me, it represents so much. Having gone to Berkeley as well, studied African-American studies, I realized that, the free speech movement, the Black Power movement, and other movements started its roots, mainly in Oakland. And so it has it's very near and dear to my heart as far as all the creativity, the innovation, and the community organizing that takes place, and how it's an epicenter for the rest of the world kind of following its footsteps subsequently later on in life. So that's what Oakland kind of eclipses or encapsulizes for me.
To our audience listening, from those that may not be native familiar with the Bay Area, we call it the Bay Area for a reason, because there's small cities, large cities, metropolitans such as San Francisco, wide open cities such as San Jose, and we have the East Bay and the North Bay, the Peninsula, South Bay. This is part of Silicon Valley. This is where tech has had the biggest boom on the face of this planet. This area is full of culture, pioneers, history, legacy. When one says that they got from Oakland to Stanford, there are bridges to be crossed. Although it may seem on the maps that you may view, perhaps even during this show, that they're close by, the reality is they're very far apart. What we've just been told is that there's one that's crossed from Oakland to Stanford. Kevin, how did you get there?
Well, ironically, one of my programs that's at Stanford, we provide transportation from Oakland every day for them to get to Stanford. some students have never actually been across one of those bridges. Ironically, you could literally live here in the Bay Area and not go across the San Mateo Bridge or the Dumbarton Bridge. Some people, grown-ups, I know adults that have never even crossed the Golden Gate Bridge here in the Bay Area. So ironically, it is something that we take for granted. But for me, coming from Oakland and going to Berkeley and doing some graduate work at Stanford and at Haas School of Business, it literally just opportunities. I'm a networker at heart. So I evaluate opportunities that come my direction all the time. And an opportunity presented itself to compete for 50 slots, I think out of, 550 social entrepreneurs from across the country, across the world, applied for this social entrepreneurship executive program that I did at Stanford. And just by the luck of the draw, was able to be accepted. And now that cohort of those folks I still connect with and network with, and they're all over the world. So I've even done a global hackathon with the United Nations based upon a relationship that I made at that particular program from a sister that owns a company called a nonprofit called Africa Teen Geeks in South Africa. So really, it's really about opportunity. There are a number of opportunities that are out there. Oftentimes we think that we can't afford the opportunity or aren't willing to invest in ourselves. The program itself, I believe, was $25,000 or something like that. But they raised money for majority of the tuition. So it was only, I think, $5,000 per student. So I invested in myself and was able to do that. So really looking at opportunities and being willing to invest in yourself is how I would answer that question.
The data that you have when it comes to camps, I have been and have had the pleasure of joining you on one of your camps before, simply just to share as a technologist. And that may be one of the first times I've ever seen, in fact, the only time I've ever seen someone that was able to take youth, young people from their native states, whether it was Contra Costa County or Alameda County. There's audience listening, that's 2 out of the 9 counties that are in the Bay Area, that make up the Bay Area, and to bring them out of the city element into an environment, not just where they can go into the great outdoors, but be joined by corporations in technology of whose products we interact with often. My question is manifold. One, how were you able to balance all that together to do things that I've never seen anyone do in STEM? And secondly, what impact do you believe that this has had with the children, with these young people, these young future leaders? What impact has that had when they're exposed in that environment?
Well, I'm going to answer that several ways. And number one, the first way is that I'm a product of it. So back in high school, I used to attend the National Society of Black Engineers used to have a camping conference for high school students. I attended 2 or 3 of those in high school. And then when I got to college and I was in the Inroads program, I had an internship at Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory and as a mechanical engineering major. And when I was there, my boss, I convinced him to fund the camping conference, and I became the camping conference chair as the Northern Region Camping Conference chairperson and public relations chair for Region 6. And I ran that for 2 years. Now, success back then was, did we have 250 kids that went? And did 250 of them come back? But now I think I've been a lot more, I actually wouldn't have even done this. I originally approached NSBE to bring this camp back because it was so influential for me to decide whether or not I wanted to pursue engineering. But they focused on elementary and junior high and didn't have the bandwidth really to institute this type of program anymore. So I said that I'll do it myself. So I not only raised the money to do it, but I hired counselors, trained the counselors, and brought 150 high school students to the Santa Cruz Mountains to learn technology. Now, the second part of your question, timing of this is impeccable, because we'll actually have, and this is a shameless plug, I actually have a end of the year fundraiser that we're putting together on November the 10th, which is Wednesday. All the information will be on our website later. We will have a 1-hour showcase of our organization. You'll get to see us thank our corporate sponsor of the year, Google, our corporate partner of the year, Walmart Labs, and then you'll get to hear from students and their families about the impact of our programs and how they've impacted their career and their lives. And then lastly, it'll have a fireside chat that I do with Shelly Archambault on being ambitiously unapologetic. So getting back though, those students, you'll hear from these students, they're talking about where they're at now. Some of the 2 families that we're acknowledging are all over the place as far as accolades through school and otherwise. Some of those kids are now in Berkeley in engineering, and they say that they attribute the camping conference particularly as the catalyst of making them wanting to pursue careers that they didn't know existed. So we're now, I actually have an intern whose job this school year actually will be to contact all of our students and find out where they are and find out what impact our programs have had in their lives. So that's a project we're going to be working on, and I'll be able to have more for you in the next several months.
Outstanding for so many different reasons. And I know you to be a person, if you say this is what you're doing, you do it. And I see that you've been met with success with so much of what you do that I've had the privy to see. I'm very excited to see the fruit of this manifestation. Let me ask you, Apple, Meta, formerly Facebook, Twitter, Electronic Arts, NVIDIA, Oracle, Intuit, PayPal. Here in this land and elsewhere, we have technology platforms. They're finding ways, some more desperate than others, they're finding ways to how do we connect our great campuses with the underserved communities, transmetropolitan, throughout the highways and the byways. Kevin, with those from these companies, of whom many work there, of our audience today, not how, why do they connect with you, and for what?
Well, I'll say that not all of them do, Christopher. And so that's something I hope we can change. I have reached out to many of those companies that you've talked to, but for whatever reason, haven't been able to establish partnerships in that regard. But we do have a number of those companies that are investing in us, whether it's financially or organizing workshops and volunteering, that kind of stuff. But what I would say is the need is there. And we definitely have students that want to learn this material. We just have to get it to them. And with the pandemic, our students are suffering tremendously, both from just not having access to the same types of technology that other students have. Students are lucky if they have a mobile phone, but to have access to a laptop computer, a real laptop computer. Some of them have Chromebooks from school, but a real laptop computer and also high-speed internet, Wi-Fi. Our students are suffering. They're at a disadvantage. So we need companies like that who have products and services or influence to be able to assist with getting students all the tools and skills, the things that they need in order to be successful. And then with us in our partnership, it's really about trying to get the technology that they create some type of bite-sized, culturally relevant way for the students to be able to relate to this information that they do, and then expose them to it with hopes of them taking that information and running with it for the future. So putting you on the spot, Christopher, you guys actually taught a 3D printing workshop for our students in the middle of nowhere. So we didn't use computers, we didn't use anything. You guys actually used brown paper bags and showed the students how to draw outlines and be able to put covers on books, like old school, regular, junior high school, where we had to wrap our books and return them back at the end of the school year. We took that concept and taught 3D printing. So it's really, well, we're not doing rocket science here, but we're exposing them to stuff that they see normally around them, but didn't relate or know that that's actually technology that people are working full time, making hundreds of thousands of dollars and designing and building.
That was a great experience with Stephanie Hervey that helped lead that with one of the many sessions that we were afforded to be able to witness and to see, and for that session to be able to participate during camp in the beautiful, very lovely Santa Cruz Hills. Let's talk pain points for a moment. Let's look at the reality of what's happened with this impact. Communities, in particular underserved communities during this pandemic in North America, have been greatly impacted. Families with lack of access when it comes to mobile, connectivity, Wi-Fi, cellular. We realize that many of our teachers in public schools, especially in the underserved districts, they have a difficult time and have had a difficult time making the adjustments. And families, when it comes to remote learning and working, schools are still at a disarray. And we find ourselves yet with opportunity. Kevin, what are some of the pain points of what it takes to even help someone? Students, their families, and what can we do? How do we roll up our sleeves to chop wood with you?
There's a couple of ways. I mean, part of the dilemma is maybe technology can solve some of this problem, but there's a lack of, like, maybe we can have a hackathon around how to continue to get communications to schools, school districts, and students. Because on one hand, it's a disconnect. We can build as many programs as we like, but if we can't get the students to find out that they're there and to be able to avail themselves of it, we're spinning our wheels and we're wasting our time. Every year, it seems, when the school year ends to the new school year, I don't know if it's a purge or what, the ability to communicate with students disappears. And there's the continuity of counselors and teachers, et cetera. There is none. So people, it's almost like teachers will go to a different school, counselors will change schools or whatever, or the ability to stay connected to those students when they go to other schools is lost. So it's almost like you spend the first 3 months of the school year connecting with and trying to find out where students are and how to reach them, how to get to them. And then by then, your school year is almost over. And by the time you're able to provide programs and get to them, they're gone. And with, the pandemic, we've had to scale our programs to be virtual. Well, a lot of students had a whole year of being virtual. So the likelihood of trying to convince students to learn something that they may be interested in, to have to do it online for a half a day or on a Saturday or something is very challenging. So we're going to have to find a way to bridge the gap of reaching students, getting students there, and being able to give them the tools that we're trying to expose them to. And then we also need money. A lot of times, people want to know how they can give or get back or help out. Like I said, I have an intern right now who's going to be doing some of this work for me, which I appreciate. This person's going to get a lot of experience. I mean, they're going to be learning so much. It's like an actual full-time job for an actual person. But that money, being able to fund someone to go out and find these students, create that tool or that tech that I'm talking about, that is something that we need, that costs, so we raise money and we're able to hire staff to take care of these things. I'm not a really selfish person. I think that we don't have to reinvent the wheel on this. Other organizations can work together on the same information. We want our kids to be exposed to as much as possible. So if we build something and are able to help students communicate and find out about programs, why wouldn't we share that with other organizations? I think there's this crab in the bucket mentality in the nonprofit sector and just in general. Whereas I built this is mine. Let me keep it over here in my shiny little place. And that does everyone a disservice, including the students who matter the most. So let's work smarter, not harder, and leverage what we're doing.
Do you believe that you can be the leader? You have the blueprint. You certainly have the wherewithal, the history to lead whole entire communities of cohorts into young people into STEM. Is the social engineering project built for scale to handle those type of production levels, not just natively in Oakland, California, but across the country and perhaps even globally? Is this possible, Kevin, if the resources and the financial givings were there?
Well, anything's possible, Christopher. I will say that the way that I look at myself is, I know a little bit about a lot to be dangerous, but I'm not a subject matter expert of everything. And I can bring, number one, if I'm walking into a room and I'm the smartest person in the room, then I'm walking in the wrong room. I need to be around smart people. For me, as you asked, being a leader, I'm a highly effective project manager. So I can build the blueprint. I can create, the point A to point B and assemble a team and manage. So from that perspective, yes, I could be the leader in that. But do I have the subject matter expertise to do the things that I'm talking about? No. So it's going to take partners to be able to do that. But ultimately, I have a vision at least of where things can go. I've been able to scale my organization in the pandemic. We didn't shutter our doors. We're here. We're in all 50 states now doing programs virtually. And in the morning, I have a asset management data science camp for high school students. They're learning about data science. They're going to learn how to pick portfolios that are socially relevant and proactive in the world, and using Python and other data to explore. So it's that I've got kids from Texas, Florida, DC, Maryland, Virginia, and the Bay Area, et cetera. So we're here, we're scaling, but this solution, I believe, is a scalable one if we can put the right heads together and make it happen.
I have to ask you this question, and we're going to lean in on this for a moment with just a few questions that we have left. I have to ask. I'm so inspired to ask this. When we talk about diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, and we talk about D&I or DEI leaders and various companies and corporations, from my lens, and certainly it may not be the ones of everyone, but from my lens, I don't see enough done. I hear it. I see these titles. I see the expertise there to some degree, subjective. Kevin, you've worked with many, but you've also seen many, and with your vast network. Are DE&I experts doing enough in companies and corporations to work with external programs?
No, is the quick answer. And also, I think that it's very complicated. I mean, it's a complicated issue, Christopher. I mean, number one, after the George Floyd incident, George Floyd murder on tape, literally every company in America started looking at getting a chief diversity officer. I actually interviewed for probably 100 of them, at the year prior, and at the end of the day, the tech industry really is like other industries, but it really only like looks at validating itself. So unless you work at a tech company first and earn your street cred of being in tech, quote unquote, they don't think that you know how to operate in a tech environment, which is pretty bizarre to me. But number two, you're not really necessarily given the resources to be able to do anything. Many of these titles, they don't even report to the CEO. They often report to chief human resource officer or something to that effect. And they're not given any budget. They're not really given any, tools. And then when it comes to recruiting and diverse talent, they're all basically looking at the same schools, looking for the same students that everybody else is. And if you come outside the norm, for example, if they recruit you from Jackson State or from Prairie View A&M, that student is going to, or the person that attended that school is going to carry the whole entire school on their shoulders. So if they don't work out, well, they're never going back to getting someone from Prairie View, But if they're from Harvard or Yale, then, oh, that was just, a one-off, because they're going to keep going there. At the end of the day, the industry doesn't value diverse talent, really. And so in order for them to do so, like now, like everybody's still putting these jobs out there, but they're not really going to move the needle, because it's really about a public atmosphere of just showing that you're doing something. I guess it's a place to start, but if you talk to people that are looking for jobs or trying to get into the industry, you have to scratch your head, because if you've interviewed for 30 companies, you're saying that all of those positions the person wasn't qualified for. I mean, I can't see, my colleagues don't think that anything is being done in the industry, because it's so difficult to break into it and get a job there. It's pretty sad. So to answer that's the long and short of the answer to your question, but I believe that there needs to be accountability. Part of what I do, both as a consultant when I was consulting for tech companies, is, okay, I see a lot of tasks. You've done a lot of, you've done trainings, you've done this and that. What's the results? What did you do? What needle did you move? Are we doing this just to be doing it? Or how are we measuring success, and how are we seeing how attitudes and behaviors are being changed? Because at the end of the day, if you do a training and nothing, you can prove that you were on computer for 60 minutes, but nothing happens as far as what your actions or your behaviors after that, then you're really just wasting your time. And that's what I believe the industry's doing, just wasting its time.
I have just a couple questions left. Goodness gracious, I could go the distance with you, Kevin, and burn some midnight oil. I have to ask. There's a land full of STEM programs. I frankly am not impressed by the most of them. I don't think that they do enough. I don't think that they deliver enough. I've seen what your program does, what the impact it does. When these young people go back to their homes in their counties, are there ways for them to connect and to stay within the ecosystem of the social engineering project and journey? But moreover, what separates the social engineering project from all these other STEM projects and platforms?
Well, to answer your question, I would say, number one, we are trying. In the pandemic, it's very challenging, like I said, we haven't had an in-person event in almost a year and a half. So we have tons of programs now because we're able to scale and do things online. But overall, we know this isn't sustainable. We need to get back in the outdoors. We need to get back in person learning. So that's our main focus and goal. And to scale in person is going to take a lot more movement as far as getting colleges and other partners in different states to sign on to our approach and our curriculum and assist us. So that would be a goal of ours to scale. But with regards to how we differ from other organizations, a lot of organizations now particularly focus on coding and software only, and that's your only ticket to get into tech. And that's a short-term ticket. A coding boot camp or something like that can definitely get students interested. They may avoid going to college and getting a job, and they can make a lot of money and that kind of stuff, and that's great. Way our program differs is that we focus on STEM as a whole. So science, math, technology, engineering, etc. We focus on the real hardcore engineering, civil engineering, electrical engineering, mechanical engineering. We need Black and brown folks in those subject matters and disciplines as well. And our goal is to get you past Math 1A, Chemistry 1A, and Physics 1A. If you're able to get past those subject matters, the opportunities for you, at least from a college perspective, are so much greater than going into tech from a social science background. Our goal really is to give our students as many options as possible. If they decide after they graduate with the STEM career to go into law or business or something like that, that's a success for us. More chances are they're going to work in a tech company doing that, which is fine. But the options are limited if they can't get past these weeder courses, these prerequisites, as they're called, but they're basically weeding people to stay out of the hardcore subject matters. And we want our students to be able to get past those and have more options.
Powerful. With my final question for you, Kevin, I ask, what's the most important thing that we should know about you and your work?
Well, ironically, people, will look at my title or see what I've accomplished and what I've achieved in my life, in my career. And all it really boils down for me is that I'm a community organizer, so like, that's not the fluff and pomp and circumstance. That's just kind of who I am. And so although I'm forward facing with STEM stuff that I do, I'm also the co-founder of Family Wellness Group. A buddy of mine, Kevin Benson, and I started this about 6 or 7 years ago. We take 25 to 30 people hiking every weekend or bike riding. We also do quarterly events. We go skiing, camping. We get Black and brown people into the wilderness and outdoors and become healthy, eating right, and also being, in nature as a work-life balance component to a stressful life. So that's one thing. I also do a whole bunch of things in politics, and I don't lead with that anymore, but that's very important to me as far as helping Black and brown people understand the political spectrum, how to run for office, how to get elected, and how to be accountable and what to do once they get there. And then the last component outside of tech that I focus on is the health and wellness of Black people, particularly. I really do a lot. I used to run the African American Wellness Project that was started by my cousin, Dr. Michael Lenore. And the goal really is to address the disparities that Black and brown people have when it comes to their health, and getting people to be healthier, eating healthy, eating to live, not living to eat, and just being a better, more wholesome person. So those areas are things that I'm involved in actively. I don't really talk about it much. I don't post about it as much, but really building community, being a networker, and helping others facilitate the necessary introductions that they need to get where they're trying to go. That's kind of my purpose. That's what it's always been, and hasn't much changed other than the fact that I'm not president of the United States.
And it might be a good thing that you're not, because the work that you're doing may have more impact for our communities than anyone that would hold the office. And I mean that in earnest and sincerity. Audience, you've heard here from Kevin Nichols. Kevin, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate the opportunity.
Our pleasure. And to our audience listening, follow Kevin. You can find him on LinkedIn. You can see more about what he's doing and what he's done in the throes of not just STEM, but assembling community, giving them more, and presenting his lens to the lives of others. I personally attest to this. I've seen the success and have benefited and been edified my own self. It's authentic, and it's the STEM project that I certainly stand behind. I hope that you would take time to chop wood with Kevin, and that all of you will keep safe and well. And we thank you for joining us here on the Christopher Lafayette Podcast Show. Good night.